Today's episode is brought to you by We Break You Buy. Interested in sports cards and memorabilia? Check out We Break You Buy on TikTok. We Break You Buy is a small operation run by three brothers, offering spots for a chance at winning some incredible sports cards and memorabilia. That's We Break You Buy. Check it out today on TikTok. Sound good, Anton. None of that static crap from last time.
All right, I think we're good to go then.
Yeah.
How about me?
Yeah, Anton had some technical difficulties on the last recording, but we won't hold that against him.
Do I sound all right?
You're sounding good.
And I appreciate you having a nice mic for this, because some of our guests don't.
Yeah, I got it.
How am I sounding? Am I a little echoey, or is that better?
No, you sound good.
Pat, okay. You sound perfect as usual.
Oh, you're too kind. Well, we are recording, and this is Why Wasn't It Better? I am your host, Patrick Darms.
And I'm your co-host, Anton Paras.
And we have a first-time guest joining us. A very special guest, Ben Hill. Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome, Ben.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure.
Can't wait to review this wonderful movie.
Wonderful is a word I would not use to describe this movie.
It's really funny. Whenever we have guests, they're very polite. They say, I'm excited to talk about this movie. It's a great movie. And then we usually say, really? Is it? So I think it's always let's have a fun realization. The process is always fun talking about these movies.
Oh, for sure. Anton, you know what I just realized? This is our season finale. We haven't even mentioned that yet. I'm embarrassed. I mean, I'm excited to talk about this movie, but it's so not good.
It's like, it's not the greatest.
No, it's
not. There
are
definitely worse.
Oh, there's far worse.
Absolutely. There's far worse, but...
There's always worse, except for Exorcist 2. I'm not sure there's worse than that. Ben, if you haven't seen Exorcist 2, don't.
Well, to be fair, there's always the scope of this podcast is films that had a lot of potential, but didn't. Versus if we just wanted to talk about bad films, there are definitely worse films than Exorcist 2.
Totally.
I don't know if I've seen anything worse than it.
Pat, I don't want to give them your way because they are literally mind-numbing films.
I mean, I won't watch them, but...
Yeah,
I believe you, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But you're right. This film in particular had a lot of hype. But before we get into that, Ben, is there anything you'd like to promote or plug?
I would like for everyone to promote themselves and just be a better person than they were the day before. Boom.
Well, that was deep.
Well said. Well said.
A first for this podcast, self-promotion for everyone.
I love that. There's too often we get guests and they just pass up the opportunity, but Ben, love the conviction.
No problem. All right, let's get it going.
Let's do it. So we're here to talk about a film called X-Men: The Last Stand. It's the third film in the X-Men franchise. Chronologically, Anton, is it the third film, or is it even too difficult to explain which one it is in the series? Because I don't know.
I mean, it's the third released film.
That's okay. Let's just keep it simple.
Yeah.
Because once you get into time travel in the sequels, it gets all bluey.
Yeah, there's a lot of films set in the past, in which case it's definitely not the third chronological film. Does this film even live on its own specific timeline? Probably. Yes. The answer is yes.
It seems like it. That's what they want you to believe. When I think of San Francisco, this is just one of the films I think of last. To be honest.
Good, because it would pain me if whenever someone thought of San Francisco, they would think of X-Men: The Last Stand.
I really enjoyed the Alcatraz attack. Oh, speaking of San Francisco, Anton, this is your opportunity. Is there anything you want to say about the Golden State Warriors and their failure to make the playoffs?
They're bums, and they did exactly what a 10th seed team should do.
Not make the playoffs. All right. I like it. You own it.
But don't worry, they'll win the championship next year.
Sure.
They'll be right there with the Knicks.
Yeah, I mean, at least the Knicks are relevant. That's all I can say. They're a relevant team. They finally moved past the era of lighting giant piles of money on fire on Fifth Avenue and hiring circus clowns like Isaiah Thomas to run their team. But back to X-Men: The Last Stand. Yeah, I guess we can just intro the film and just talk about this. It's a big one. History forgets. This was a big movie when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
So the plot is as follows. The discovery of a cure for mutations leads to a turning point for mutants. They may now choose to give up their powers and become fully human or retain their uniqueness and remain isolated. War looms between the followers of Charles Xavier, who preaches tolerance, and those of Magneto, who advocates the survival of the fittest. X-Men The Last Stand was released on May 26, 2006 by 20th Century Fox. It was directed by Brett Ratner. The screenplay was written by Zach Penn and Simon Kinberg. It stars Hugh Jackman, Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, Halle Berry, Famke Janssen, Anna Paquin, Kelsey Grammer, Rebecca Romaine, James Marsden, Sean Ashmore, Aaron Stanford, and Vinnie Jones. The budget was $210 million, adjusted for inflation that is $320 million adjusted. And the box office was $460 million. That is $702 million adjusted for inflation. Ben, as today's guest, why did you want to talk about X-Men The Last Stand?
They just lost so many opportunities in this movie, like Cyclops, quote unquote, scheduling conflicts. He had a problem. What was her name? Mystique, Rebecca Roman. I can't pronounce her last name. She also had problems, but the fact that Cyclops was only there for 20 minutes, I was like, that's a little bit sketchy. It's like there were way too many characters. We'll talk about that more, but like there's way too many characters, and only one good thing happened in this entire movie, according like in my opinion. And I guess I don't know if we want to talk about this now or later.
We can talk about it both now and later. Missed opportunities is a really great way of putting it.
Okay, yes, a lot of missed opportunities. But
did you see this when it came out?
I didn't see it when it came out. Oh, yes, actually I did, because of the one meme that came out of this, and the best opportunity that they captured, and that was the Juggernaut.
Oh, yes.
Yes, that was my favorite thing, and I saw that in the theaters, and I was like, I don't know how memes can get any better now.
It was so very much in the zeitgeist at the time, and I
Yeah.
do remember the lead up to this film. Once we found out the Juggernaut was going to be in it, everyone wanted to know, like, is he going to say it?
Yeah. And then I don't know if they had to reshoot his part for that or what it was, but most of it was CGI anyway, when they were shooting in the building with the kid. So I mean, I guess it probably took like a helmet and some camera, and then boom.
And some very obviously CGI circles and walls.
Yes. It's like,
looks like he's running through like Swiss cheese holes in the wall.
Yeah. I'm surprised actually the rest of the graphics for the movie kept up. I rewatched it again before we did this, and like, surprisingly most of it was relatively good for a movie from 2006.
Yeah, I agree with that, except for
Yeah.
one thing that we're going to talk about,
All right.
which is, well, we can talk about it now too. The de-aged characters in the beginning, and
Yes. It's like, okay, like, come on. It looked like bad Instagram filters, but
I saw this when it came out opening weekend. I was, as I've repeated on this podcast, I'm not the biggest comic book fan, but I had seen the first two X-Men's by this point, and I enjoyed them at the time. And rewatching them to prepare for this podcast, I had forgotten just how good the second one is. It's definitely one of the better superhero films of that era. It had a lot of things going for it. I was excited for this one for sure. I had no reason to suspect that it would be bad. And I don't know if I really knew who Brett Ratner was. I probably knew him from Rush Hour, like instinctively without realizing it. But I didn't know that there was baggage attached to his name at the time. I don't think anybody did.
Yeah.
Anton, correct me if I'm wrong. That became a thing later.
Exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, I saw this opening weekend. I thought it was pretty forgettable. And I didn't think much of it until someone suggested that we had to cover it for this podcast, because it really does check all the boxes of why wasn't it better. There was a ton of hype for this, and it does not have a good reputation. But Anton, as our esteemed comic book expert, how excited were you for this?
I was extremely excited as a youngster for X-Men The Last Stand. Big X-Men fan in general, as everyone knows. Love me some comics. And I remember even going into the trailers for this film and a lot of the marketing, it really focused on, one of my top X-Men of all time, of course, Wolverine. So there's a lot of hype there and a lot of excitement. Yeah, so this was before Reddit was really popular. So you have your historical internet forums, and there was a lot of speculation on what would be included in the film. And as we'll talk about, certain things were embraced almost a bit too much. And that can open up to discussion, of course, of when are references just falling flat versus actually adding to the depth of the film. But I was really excited for this one.
And you were disappointed by it.
Yeah, that's fair to say.
Most people would agree this is a pretty disappointing film. I don't think I've ever really heard anyone say they love this. Now that I think about it, like, have you ever heard anyone like, "Oh yeah, X-Men: The Last Stand, that was awesome"?
Oh yeah, definitely got to go home and rewatch that. No.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. But if we've learned anything, Pat,
Someone somewhere on the
someone-
corner of the internet will
Yeah.
defend this movie.
I mean, this is
Exactly.
definitely something that you play in the background while you're doing other things. This has that second screen magic to it. You know,
It's not quite enough, not quite interesting enough to be at the center of your attention.
yeah, but definitely something to be in the background.
Yeah, you can. I had it on, and at one point, this was like over the last couple of days, I was like, I could peel potatoes while I watch this, right? Like,
Yeah.
But I think one of the reasons, Anton and Ben too, if you've seen a lot of the sequels to this, I think, like, for me, in my memory, this blended together with a lot of the sequels. There was like a couple Wolverine movies. There
Mhm.
was whatever the one that takes place in the 60s.
There were a couple
Yes.
that took place in the 60s.
I know.
Oh, so yeah,
First Class took. First Class was
right,
one of
okay.
them. Yeah.
You see where I'm going? I'm already
Yeah.
lost. One of them involves time travel, but I just, in my memory, I had seen all of them, and I had trouble distinguishing like which was which. But this was a huge deal when it came out. We mentioned the box office numbers. It had the biggest Memorial Day weekend opening ever at the time, and it actually outgrossed the first two films, which I found interesting. But it was considered such a creative misfire that X-Men: Days of Future Past was made, at least in part, as a way to undo many of the effects of this film. So, Anton, as far as I know, it has no continuity in the X-Men cinematic universe. They've completely written this movie out of existence.
Yeah, and that was probably the best decision.
I understand why they did it.
I don't
That's
know.
all I can say.
I just think with time travel and Marvel in general, somehow this is going to pop up on another one of the timelines. Like you never know.
I hope not. There's been so many X-Men films at this point. I don't think I've seen all of them. I don't think I've seen any of the ones after Days of Future Past. Because what's after that? There's Apocalypse.
Yep,
Mhm.
there's the Apocalypse film, there's Dark
Didn't-
Phoenix.
Didn't see that.
Dark Phoenix
There's
does a better job of explaining her than this movie, in my opinion.
but still not a great film.
Yeah.
There was there was 3 different Wolverine films.
Mm-hmm.
X-Men
One of them
Origins.
was terrible.
2 of them were terrible.
Oh, okay.
X-Men Origins Wolverine was the one with Sabretooth.
Yes.
And then the Wolverine,
Oh, with Liev Schreiber?
yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now that confused me because I know we're not doing a podcast on that movie, but rewatching the first 3, I forgot Sabretooth is in the first one.
Yes, Sabretooth is in the first one. They make him his canonical brother, and Deadpool is in the film, as well as Will.i.am from the Black Eyed Peas.
Yes.
What was he doing in that movie?
He was getting it started. All right.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't go very far.
That's a good one. Let's get.
Oh man, his film career, it didn't take off.
No. There was that. And then there was the Wolverine, which was the sequel and that was set in Japan. That was all right, not great. And then of course Logan, which I'm a fan.
Everybody loves.
I'm a fan.
It's fine. I like it.
And then, funny enough, we have the Deadpool films, which are also X-Men films.
Yeah.
Hard pass.
Oh, that.
Hard pass. I'm not if the listeners haven't figured it out, I am not the best person to talk about X-Men films with.
Pat, it's an unpopular opinion, but I respect you for it.
Yeah.
Look, it's not my cup of tea.
He definitely does Ryan Reynolds does a good job of making up for all the bad previous choices in X-Men movies in them. I'll just say that.
Believe it or not, I'd rather rewatch this.
It's again, I don't agree with you at all, but again, I respect you for it, Pat.
He's one of those actors where you either like him or you don't, and I'm just like, nah, I'm good. I like Mint Mobile, though. I'll give him credit for that.
Yeah, so thank you for being a good human,
Yeah.
Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, he seems like a genuinely nice person.
Yeah, very funny.
Yeah, he makes a nice gin. Aviation Gin, shout out.
Owns a football team.
That's right. That's a soccer team for all you American listeners.
America.
All right, let's talk about the production history of this movie. So, doing the research for this, you really get the sense that 20th Century Fox, they did not know what to do with it. The first two movies had almost been considered surprise hits by the studio. Now, Bryan Singer, we haven't even mentioned him yet.
Ugh.
He directed the first two films, X-Men and X2, and he decided to leave working on this sequel to make Superman Returns, especially after he had quote-unquote major disagreements with the studio. History has not been kind to Bryan Singer, but I do find it funny that he left this film to work on Superman Returns. So in a way, Anton, he was responsible for two disappointing movies. Pretty hard to do.
But if there was anyone that was going to do it.
Look, all of the legal issues aside, he's done some good movies. I'll give him that. Usual Suspects is a great movie.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Again, first two X-Men's pretty good. The second one's really good. I think he did one other film that we're going to cover next season, Anton, that I like at least. Valkyrie.
Yeah, Tom Cruise. We love talking about Tom Cruise here.
It's a lot of fun to talk about. He's been in a lot of great movies.
Yes.
Which is not an unpopular opinion. Before departing the project in 2004, Singer collaborated on a screenplay treatment that featured Emma Frost as the main villain. It also featured Magneto trying to control Jean Grey. And funny enough, Singer would later admit to regretting his decision to leave the series. No shit. The Fox executives were reportedly extremely angered by Singer's departure, and thus it began their search for a new director. The following were considered: Darren Aronofsky, Joss Whedon, Rob Bowman, Alex Proyas, Zack Snyder, and Guillermo del Toro. However, all of them turned down offers to direct this film. And for what it's worth, Zack Snyder was busy making 300 at the time, and del Toro was making Pan's Labyrinth. So pretty wise decisions on their part.
Definitely. But we were talking before we began the recording that maybe they got a little bit upset that I keep forgetting his name. The guy that plays Cyclops went to go to the Superman Returns movie.
Oh, what's his name?
Yeah.
Oh, he's so boring. Anton, what's his name? Marsden?
Thinks. Hold on.
Well, we'll just say it's
James
Marsden.
Marsden.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, he was in there for 20 minutes, the entire movie.
Yeah.
And then
one of the biggest characters in the franchise just vaporized.
Yeah, he's gone. Just went to go play Lois Lane's fiance, and I was like, that's weird, but okay.
It's another boring movie.
Yeah.
Good heavens.
But go on.
So by February 2005, despite still not having a director, Fox publicly announced that filming would begin in July, with a release date set to May 26, 2006. So yes, just to reiterate, Fox locked themselves into a release date, giving the director that they still hadn't hired yet a little more than a year to make the film. So how could that go wrong? So Matthew Vaughn was hired as director, and he instantly went to work. He worked on the screenplay and storyboarded the entire film. He cast Kelsey Grammer as Beast, Danya Ramirez as Callisto, and Vinnie Jones as Juggernaut. But Vaughn ended up quitting the project deep into pre-production. He was wary of the tight deadlines imposed by Fox, later stating that he, quote, didn't have the time to make the movie that I wanted to make, end quote. So once again, Fox refused to postpone the release, echoing the mistake that they had made with Planet of the Apes 5 years earlier. Now, years later, in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Vaughn went into a little bit more detail about why he left the project. He said, quote, I went into one of the executives' offices and I saw an X3 script and I immediately knew it was a lot fatter. I was like, what the hell is this draft? And he went, don't worry about it. And I'm like, no, I'm the director. I'm worrying about this draft. He wouldn't tell me, so I literally grabbed it. It was like a crazy moment, and I opened the first page, and it said, quote, Africa, storm, kids dying of no water. She creates a thunderstorm and saves all these children, end quote. Vaughn admitted that he found the script a pretty cool idea, but once he learned what was going to happen to the script, his relationship with the project soured. Quote, I went, what is this? They said, oh, it's Halle Berry's script. And I said, okay, because she hasn't signed up yet, but this is what she wants. And once she signs up, we'll throw it in the bin, the director said, recounting the executive's response. I was like, wow, you're going to do that to an Oscar-winning actress who plays Storm? I'm out of here. So I quit at that point, end quote.
Oh my gosh. By this point, Fox was desperate. Enter Brett Ratner, who promised to deliver a finished film in time for the release date. He had less than a year to make this movie. That includes filming and post-production. Ratner was surprised to be offered the movie and, because of his limited knowledge of the comics, relied heavily on screenwriters Simon Kinberg and Zach Penn to keep the plot faithful to the source material. He did, of course, bring some of his own ideas to the table, which meant there were more rewrites. Ratner was allegedly a complete scumbag on set, with numerous reports of bullying actors, including but not limited to the use of homophobic slurs. This has been confirmed by Elliot Page and Anna Paquin. There's been a number of articles published on this over the years, if you care to read about it. Cinematographer Philippe Roussillot quit shortly into production and was replaced by Dante Spinotti. It's worth pointing out that Fox initially had no intention of making a sequel to this. They really intended this to be the last stand, or at least the end of an era. The primary reason for this is that most of the actors' contracts were expiring, and Fox knew it would have been too expensive to bring back the same cast.
Trivia time for the both of you. This had a budget of $210 million, which at the time briefly made it the most expensive film ever made, which is hilarious because it doesn't look like it. It would be eclipsed weeks later by which film?
2006. Was it Man of Steel? No. Okay.
No. It was the highest grossing movie of 2006.
Highest grossing film, 2006.
Cars?
No. I'll give you a hint. It's a Disney movie, though.
Happy Feet?
Nope.
Wow, I am.
2006.
It's a live action movie.
Oh, it's one of the Pirates films.
It is. Yep. The second one, Dead Man's Chest.
There we go.
Which, Anton, I've decided when we covered at World's End, we said we weren't going to cover Dead Man's Chest. I think we should. I think it'd be fun.
That's fair.
Because I like that movie, but
we want to sail the high seas.
It does fit the criteria of the podcast. Yeah, so somehow this lemon ended up being the most expensive movie ever made for a couple weeks. That's astounding.
Good for them.
Yeah. I think I have it somewhere in the notes, but this cost almost twice as much as the second film to make.
Well, if you think of all the rush jobs that they had to do, I mean, of course.
All the rush jobs, a massive cast.
Yeah.
You know how many actors they had to hire to play multiple man?
Those were all extras.
Yep, all extras. No CGI there. They did it to save money. Today's podcast is brought to you by Sprizzy. Looking to skyrocket your YouTube channel's growth? Meet Sprizzy, your video's ultimate matchmaker. Their tailored ad campaigns connect your content with viewers who are already looking for videos like yours. With Sprizzy, you're not just getting views, you're gaining subscribers who are genuinely interested in what you create. Are you ready to boost your reach? Visit Sprizzy.com today and let's launch your channel to new heights. Sprizzy, the smarter way to promote your YouTube channel. Let's talk about why wasn't this better. Number one reason, the storytelling, which is basically caused by studio interference. They really bit off more than they can chew with the storylines. This film is what I call busy. Too much going on, too much story to tell, too many characters. It's bloated. This is a very bloated movie.
I mean, even just for the length of the movie itself, when we think about what storylines they're putting together to even make the film, it's not enough time to tell it.
It's not.
No.
It's like a hour 45 minutes. Like that's not enough.
No. With the credits. So it's really like 90 minutes.
Right. Like
And it all starts with that script. The studio's interference directly led to some very serious storytelling flaws. So the final version of the script, right, it was written by Kinberg and Zach Penn. It was ultimately a combination of two completely different storylines. Now, this is where, Anton, you're really going to get to flex here because I know of these things, but I don't know much about them. Dark Phoenix Saga and Gifted. Gifted is the story arc that was apparently written by Joss Whedon in Astonishing X-Men. Do I have that right?
That's right.
Where a cure for mutation had been developed. It was used for the story's political angle as well as the setup for X-Men, the X-Men's conflict with Magneto, and then Dark Phoenix was used for the conflict with Jean Grey. Anton, do these two things belong in the same film?
So I'll say this. There are X-Men storylines, right, where certain characters from both storylines interact, like the Dark Phoenix being a aspect of the Jean Grey character, a very important, popular character, has appeared in important X-Men storylines. If they wanted to progress the story further of Jean Grey and also have her be the Phoenix character while moving along the story of the cure from Astonishing X-Men, Gifted from the storyline from Astonishing X-Men, they could have, if they had more time and not just immediately shove in Jean Grey as the Dark Phoenix. That felt like out of nowhere. there's so many issues in comic books that allow the storylines to really be fleshed out and feel like a more cohesive, organic story. But you had only one film before this, and you immediately had an 180 character change for Jean Grey. So no, these stories together did not mix very well here.
Ben, you mentioned the runtime too.
Yeah, it's just way too short.
The second film is like a half hour longer than this and has a more simplistic story. I'm not, that's not to the film's detriment. I think the second movie had a really great story and it had the proper runtime to tell it. This had just the complete opposite. According to the research that I've done, Anton, they didn't even get all of the parts of the Dark Phoenix storyline correct. They changed it to make it, I guess, more friendly to casual audiences.
Which makes no sense because they threw in a lot of things that was not friendly to casual audiences in this film.
No, I mean, this film, according to this film, Magneto wanted to use her power in his war against humanity, and then Charles Xavier was apparently repressing her power. By the way, none of which was hinted at in the previous two films.
Right.
But the Dark Phoenix thing was actually at the inclusion of the writers. They fought with the studio to get it included in the movie. The studio just wanted the Cure story.
Yeah.
Which,
now, that's the interesting part about this, right?
I think it makes sense to just have the Cure story by itself because, like I mentioned before our recording, it's a really compelling story.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely is.
The senator, his son, and...
Yeah. When I saw that in the trailers, I remember thinking like, well, that looks cool. Like, that's pretty new. That's unique. The Fox executives, they thought that the tone of the Phoenix story was too mature for a mainstream summer movie and that its appeal would be limited to like the hardcore fans rather than general audiences. Yeah, they were right. And then, of course, they just decided to put it in there anyway. The writers were apparently told that they could use the Phoenix story but not emphasize it too much, which is just stupid.
Yeah.
It's a fatal error. Both storylines end up half-baked. Neither one get fully developed, especially with the limited runtime. Like, they're at one point, when they go to rescue the kid who's on Alcatraz Island.
Leech.
Right. By that point, I honestly had forgotten about him because you don't see him in the film for like almost an hour.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, there is a kid.
Yeah, it's like Beast talks to him at the beginning for a little bit, and then, all right, that's it.
Also, a question about this, Anton. So was he like a hostage? Because they're basically keeping him in a prison, but he can play video games. So it's like, where are his parents? Can he leave?
I mean, they don't really explain it. And
no,
it's interesting. In the original comic book run, it was very, and this is why it was even more compelling in the comics. The mutant that was part of the clinical trial testing for the actual cure in the storyline in the comics, her powers manifested and like basically like she lost her family because her powers went berserk. And so the same doctor in that storyline helped to develop like the cure for mutants that didn't want to deal with like having their powers. Versus now it feels like having just the Leech character and just it makes it easier to just develop a drug to remove powers, but not necessarily as like compelling of, oh yeah, these powers can be very destructive.
None of it was explained, really. Yeah, I'm glad you were able to add that context because it sure as heck was not explained in the film. Another thing too, Phoenix appears as like this terrible threat, right?
Yep.
They keep saying like, oh my, she could just destroy the whole world. It's crazy. She's like a nuclear weapon, right? Like basically like a doomsday device.
Yeah, that's fair.
She's kind of just standing around until the end, right?
Yeah, she's like the crazy one on the side where everyone's like, oh, she's going to do something crazy eventually, maybe.
Right. But they don't explain her motivation in any way. She's just presented as this psycho who can kill everyone. But like, why is she doing it? Like, they try to hint at the dual personality thing where it's like taking her over, and at the end she asks Logan to kill her and he does, right? Okay. But that side of her personality, right? That dominant, that dark Phoenix side, whatever, that's not really explained why it's getting her to do this.
It's also, again, it's its own story that should be told in its own film. They did end up making their own Dark Phoenix film, but in the comics, it just feels a lot more natural because, again, you have so many issues and so many opportunities to really explain the character, which is a very, it's a big character. It's a very nuanced character. And just writing it in this way of like it's a dual personality for Jean Grey that is just crazy and wants to kill everyone, it feels like a cop-out.
It was boring. That's what it was. Ben, you mentioned scheduling conflicts earlier. That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah, that's what they always say. But it's always something in the back. But Mystique had a scheduling issue, but others reports online says that she just wasn't happy with Brett Ratner. Cyclops went to Superman. Stuff like that.
I can only
And-
imagine the
and-
stuff Brett Ratner must have been saying to Rebecca Romaine on set.
Yeah.
I don't want to, but
Also, Ian McKellen was working on the Da Vinci Code. I still think that movie was better than this, but
we are covering the Da Vinci Code, my
Mhm.
friend, if you're interested in that episode.
yes.
Because that movie was a phenomenon when it came out, and it is completely forgotten.
Yes. Oh man.
Even when that book was released, it was
It was huge.
Everyone was
but
talking about that.
no, I mean, this is probably the same thing with what was that book, The Satanic Verses?
Oh, Salman Rushdie?
Yeah, that was pretty big when it was released, kind of top of mind for everyone with its controversy,
Yeah, definitely.
but now no one really cares.
Yeah.
We're definitely going to cover the Da Vinci Code. That's going to be a fun one. Who does he play? Professor Teabing or whatever? Some hilarious name. Did either of you see the South Park episode that parodied that?
No.
Oh, man,
It's funny.
I don't remember if I did.
They change Ian McKellen's character's name to Teabag.
It's low hanging fruit there.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. The actors, a lot of like major characters in the previous two films their roles were reduced. Ben, you mentioned Rebecca Romaine, you mentioned Cyclops. Anna Paquin was filming The Squid and the Whale, so her character is absent from an entire chunk in this film. Rogue might as well have not been in the movie.
Again, 5 seconds in the beginning, and then that's it.
And even her character, not well written, because I would want to get the cure too if I were her.
Mm-hmm.
And all the other characters are like, there's nothing to cure. It's like, well, you kill anybody you touch. So it's like, that's not great. Like that's not the best superpower.
Rogue's character is way more badass in the comics. Very powerful, but yes, tragic. She can't touch anyone. But the other aspect that they don't have in the films is her relationship with Gambit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a note on that.
Gambit, again, another person that was just in the Will.i.am X-Men movie.
Was he really?
Yeah.
I don't even remember him.
Yeah, they
in
were
that.
going to make a full-on Gambit
He's the guy
film.
with the cards, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that too.
Wait, Gambit has his own movie?
They were going to, but then decided against it.
Oh, okay. I have no idea. There's just so many of these movies. James Marsden, that's his name, Cyclops. So he was committed to Superman Returns, like you mentioned, Ben.
Yes.
Killing his character off was the decision of the studio. They had considered killing him off screen with a dialogue reference, but Kinberg and Penn insisted that Jean kill him to emphasize the relationship. But he also sort of gets killed off screen anyway.
Yeah.
And this is how they chose to address the fate of one of the most popular X-Men.
You can see why they decided to change this up with Days of Future Past.
Definitely. His death has no bearing on the plot of this film whatsoever. They kind of discover that he gets killed like 20 minutes into the film, and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
It should have felt more emotional.
Yeah. It's like, well, we have his sunglasses to remember him by.
And he does return as Cyclops in X-Men Days of Future Past.
Right.
Yeah.
Because time is a flat circle.
Time is a construct, I guess.
Didn't they bring back Bryan Singer for that?
They did
Yes.
bring back Bryan Singer.
Yes, they
Yeah.
did.
Talk about full circle. Any other film would have rearranged the schedule or delayed in order to fully include these key characters, but they were locked into this release date. They weren't deviating from it. They refused to push anything back, and that's how we got this, right?
It's a shame.
Apparently, much of the screenplay was shrouded in secrecy, and even the actors had problems with getting full screenplays. The call sheets did not reveal all the characters, so many scenes were shot in different ways using alternate takes. Both of the ending scenes were not included in the shooting script, and Ratner, with Ratner taking a small crew during one day's lunchtime to film the post-credit scene with Xavier, and later going to London to film Magneto in the park.
So what's funny about it? It's funny, but they still use techniques like that for the bigger Avengers films,
Mm-hmm.
like for Infinity
Right,
War.
so it can work.
Yeah.
It can work. It's just, what does this film think it is? Infinity War?
Yeah. I was like, it's either they're trying to pull a Spider-Man where they don't want someone to spoil it, or they're just making it up as they go along. I mean, that's why they didn't give it out to anybody. Which wouldn't be wrong.
All right, the Juggernaut line. What do we think?
Amazing.
What line are you talking about, Pat? And is
Yeah.
there any context you can give to me about it?
Oh, Pat, if you don't mind, I'm well versed in this part.
Oh, Ben, please.
Please.
Oh my gosh. So 2005, 2006, there was a dubbed over version of the 1992 X-Men animated series that was circling around on YouTube. And it was a guy, and he was just saying, "Yeah, it's the Juggernaut, bitch." And he was just like do obnoxious stuff like the entire time. And it was just like so poorly done, and it's so early popular YouTube that it is just great. And then in the movie, towards the end, Juggernaut is chasing somebody and like they hit him. He's like, "Don't you know who I am? I'm the Juggernaut, bitch." But he says in like this posh British accent. So it's like, but it was still, I'm still pretty solid. Like happy that they did that.
Yeah, it's one of the I don't want to say like best, but it's one of the most interesting moments of Easter eggs and fan service that I've seen in films because it's also a very obscure line. And Pat,
Yeah.
I think you said it best before we were recording. It dates the movie a little bit. Like if you know the reference, it does put a smile on your face a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. It is amusing, but it's like I was saying to you before we were recording. Like I had to explain that to my niece. Like I laughed and she didn't. She's like, "What does that mean?" I'm like, "Well, it's this whole thing. It was early YouTube. Matter of fact, it might have been the first thing I ever saw on YouTube."
Yeah.
I mean,
Now that I think about
it went viral like
oh yeah, it was huge. We were watching it in school and everything.
I think
Oh,
like
yeah.
9 million views on the video to this day.
Still,
It is amusing. The character of the Juggernaut in this film is I don't know what to make of him.
Just he's the heavy muscle. There's really not much to make of him. Like a lot of the characters in
Yeah.
this film, they're the characters by name only and whatever their physical attributes are.
I'll say this, I think they picked the right actor. I like Vinnie Jones in this role, former professional football player Vinnie Jones.
I mean, why do you like Vinnie Jones as the Juggernaut? I'm curious.
This movie is incredibly stupid and his performance is stupid and I think it fits the film very well.
That's the best answer I've heard.
This film is, I think, very uniform in its stupidity. It says a lot of stupid things. There's a lot of stupid scenes with stupid lines and stupid action sequences and characters making stupid decisions. And at least it's consistent in its stupidity. And I have to almost compliment it for that.
I would say in the comics, he's supposed to be Charles Xavier's brother.
I did not know that.
wow.
Yeah, but that's pretty stupid then in this film.
Yeah.
I can see why you dislike it. One of the reasons I think this movie's stupid is they didn't even maintain continuity from the other two films. Like, why is Xavier such a jerk in this movie? I don't know if they deliberately wrote him that way so the audience would feel less bad when he dies, but he's not like this at all in the first two films. Like when Logan is like questioning him about like what he's doing with Jean, and he's like, "You don't know what you're talking about," and he gets all like pissy with him.
Well, it's why I feel like the writers were leaning too heavily on their comics understanding because Charles Xavier is a huge jerk in the comics.
But you agree, not in the first two films, so
but
it's
not in the films.
consistent.
So
No.
it's a complete character turn that comes
Like,
out of nowhere.
Like I knew him as Picard, like the benevolent captain.
Mm-hmm.
Ben, you're a Star Trek guy, right?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, like he's such a jerk to other characters in this film, and then he gets vaporized, which is a pet peeve of mine. If you're gonna kill a character, just kill them and keep them dead.
But then he dies, and again, it should be a bit more emotional, but it's not.
I mean, it's a dramatic scene. It's a lot of slow motion.
It's funny. He like kind of mentions it at the beginning too. He was like, yeah, when he's talking to Storm, and she's like, "Oh yeah, maybe you can take over." She's like, Are you not telling us something?" And I guess he already knew that was going to happen.
Right. I thought they had a missed opportunity, Ben. Speaking of missed opportunities, after the prologue, I thought that they were going to show how he got crippled.
Yeah.
And I thought it was going to be Jean's powers getting out of control and accidentally crippling him. And that's why he became obsessed with like controlling her power. But they didn't do that. And I feel like that would have been better writing than what they have here. That might come across as really mean on my part, but well, when you see him get out of the car and start walking, I'm like, oh shoot, we're gonna see how he gets crippled. I wasn't even trying to make a joke. Like I legitimately thought that in the movie theater because I thought she was gonna go all psycho and like permanently paralyze him, but like they don't ever show that, and you just see him in a wheelchair later, and it's just that part of the story is missing.
It's like
you have to.
how that guy cut his arm off in Hot Tub Time Machine.
It's a great bit.
And it would have been a great line for him to tell Logan, like, you don't understand. That's why I'm in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Shut up, Mr. Wolf. And then, of course, at the end, they can't just keep him dead in the post-credit sequence. They're like, well, good thing his identical twin brother
Yeah.
who's been a vegetable,
One of the
might be
greatest,
able to
the
do
greatest
some,
tropes of all times.
yeah, the chicanery. Also, Anton, we were talking about this before the recording. The whole class of mutant rankings, it's silly. It's never mentioned in the previous two films.
They use it in this film to just try to make or to level set how powerful Dark Phoenix is, right?
Right.
But at the end of the day, it doesn't really add anything, I think.
No.
But the comics do have their own power leveling system. I mentioned it, but Pat or Ben, do you know what the highest class of mutant is? Like what the strongest mutant class is in the comics officially?
No clue.
I know you just told me like an hour ago and I forgot.
It's Omega.
Who is an Omega level mutant? Jean Grey?
Jean Grey. Technically, Storm is an Omega level mutant.
Well, they don't mention that in the film.
They don't. But again, it's just part of those things where I've read comics long enough that I accept it like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But that also just feels kind of arbitrary to just choose Omega as the level of highest classification of like mutant strength.
The way they talk about it in this movie reminds me of the midichlorians from the Star Wars prequels, where it's just like, where did that come from?
Oh yeah, they're
Yes.
a level 5 mutant, of course.
Anton, this one's for you. There's a line of dialogue that made me laugh so hard, and I wrote it down. I believe this line is delivered by Xavier to Logan, and he says, quote, "The only explanation I can think is that her powers must have wrapped her in a cocoon of telekinetic energy," end quote. Cracks me up. A cocoon of telekinetic energy.
Really good techno babble right there.
Yeah, holy mackerel. Again, Jean's powers having to be controlled by Charles, never hinted at in the previous two films at all. In fact, it was the opposite. He was trying to help her.
Mm-hmm.
She was trying to like learn from him. And also at the end of the second film, she uses her Dark Phoenix powers to save them all from the flood when the dam breaks.
Yeah, but it completely takes her over in the third one for reasons.
It sure does. So we get to the ending of this film, right? Everything that they set up just kind of peters out, right? The cure doesn't work. Charles isn't really dead. It goes nowhere.
I mean, Fraser, he netted out pretty well.
He's one of the only things I like about this movie.
He gets appointed ambassador to the United Nations.
Mm-hmm.
He was great in this film. He really was. But yeah, we talked about the runtime. It's basically 90 minutes.
Yeah.
Ben, did you see any of the deleted scenes?
I have not.
They're on YouTube.
Oh, adding that right now.
They don't add much.
No. They're not really worth watching. Although I'm not making this up. There is a clip of Juggernaut smashing through walls while chasing some of the characters, and he's yelling, "Here's Juggy."
Stop. That is no.
There's also more scenes of Callisto's crew. They're called in the movie. I don't know if you caught it. They're called the Omegas.
The Village People.
Yeah.
Oh.
They are dressed like the Village People. Just pointing that out.
Yes, they are. Shouts out to Ken Leung. He played the guy with quills on his face.
Yes, he.
And so in the comics, his name should be Pat. Ben, if you were gonna guess the guy with quills in his face, what do you think his name's Quill, right? Nope.
Mhm.
In the
Gotta be
film,
Quill.
in the credits, his name is Kid Omega because they messed up, and that's what ended up in the film.
Wait, what?
I'm not even kidding. If you look in the official credits, he gets credited as Kid Omega.
Who is Kid Omega, though?
Not Quill, I'll tell you that.
Did they just like mess up the credits?
They did. If you look at it, it's officially written as Kid Omega.
Did they credit anyone else as Quill accidentally?
I didn't notice that, but it's just kind of hilarious. It's just one of those things where, well, that fell through the cracks.
Wow. Well, I mean, I can understand that, Anton. They just didn't have the budget to get all that stuff right. This wasn't like it was the most expensive movie ever made.
No. No. What a
That brings
shame.
us to the next reason why this film wasn't better. There are too many characters.
It's like 140 characters in this movie.
You might not even be exaggerating. That's what it felt like. A lot of them, Anton, my understanding is that a lot of seemingly major characters in the comics were reduced to like bad cameos.
Yeah, that's
Like I know
exactly right.
Angel is a major character in the comics. I for sure knew who Beast was
Mhm.
because of I had seen a little bit of the cartoon as a kid.
I mean,
And then Kitty Pryde.
yeah, you barely, like I said, even with Juggernaut, it's the characters by name or physical attributes only. You really don't get an understanding of the characters' motivations or why they're cool. The one before this, you know exactly who Nightcrawler is, his motivation, why he's a compelling character. In this film, you can't name that for any new mutant that's been introduced.
No. Really glad you mentioned Nightcrawler, right? Because this is one of the things that Bryan Singer did really well with the first two films, especially the second one, because to your point, Anton, the second one had a lot of characters in it. Singer did an excellent job of balancing everyone in that ensemble cast very intelligently. To your point, Nightcrawler does not have a lot of screen time in the second movie, and he has a real personality, a real backstory, real motivation with not that much dialogue. It's really good direction from Bryan Singer. Brett Ratner does none of that here. Not only that, not only did they add 140 characters, as Ben pointed out, they went and then undermined the characters who had been around for the previous movies. Iceman, Storm, Rogue, Cyclops. And even if you think about the first movie, right? The first movie had less characters. Each side had a handful of mutants, all with decent characterization and screen time. But here it's just fan service.
And the cheapest kind of fan service.
They didn't know
Anton,
when to
you hate
service
this
at that
film,
point.
don't you?
It's just very upsetting because this was still at a time where there was a lot of promise because there was a lot of investment in Hollywood films, but from Hollywood in comic book films, but they still weren't getting it right. I mean, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man films, at least the first two anyway, were just the best things about the early 2000s when it came to comic book films. And you just can easily get so hyped up for X-Men The Last Stand because you want to see all these characters and storylines and what you love about the comics. But what ends up happening on screen is like when a kid takes all of his action figures and just like smashes them together. That's what you got on screen.
Funny you mentioned Spider-Man because it makes sense, right? That is exactly one of the things that Spider-Man 3 did wrong is too many characters. Same problem. Now, I didn't know this at the time, but the studio was simultaneously developing spin-off films, X-Men Origins Wolverine, which actually did ended up being released in 2009, which is an awful movie, and X-Men Origins Magneto, which never got made. So they actually set limitations on which mutants could be used for cameo appearances in this film, The Last Stand. It was an attempt to avoid risking character development for Wolverine. For example, this is the note that I mentioned earlier, Gambit was considered for the convoy scene to be freed by Magneto, but the writers did not want to introduce a fan favorite and, quote, not be able to do him justice, end quote. That's hilarious because they did no one justice in this film. Now, he is definitely a fan favorite, is he not?
Yeah, I'd say I would definitely say so.
Remember using Gambit in like a lot of the X-Men video games. He was pretty solid. He always had like the little credit card like move. It was great.
Halle Berry initially decided not to reprise her role as Storm. She cited a lack of character development in the previous two films, and she also had a negative relationship with Bryan Singer, who knew. However, after Singer's departure and after she had suffered a major box office flop with Catwoman, she agreed to return on the condition that her role be expanded. So this is why Storm replaces Xavier and Cyclops as the team leader.
It's funny. It almost seems to me like a corporate negotiation for a larger title.
Sometimes you just got to get a check, you know?
Yeah. Wolverine, he doesn't have much to do here either. His story arc was pretty much completed in the second film.
But he sells toys.
He does sell toys.
And he's very popular. I mean, there's a reason he's front and center in all the marketing because he is one of the, if not the most
they knew what they
popular
had
X-Men of all time.
with Hugh Jackman, right? He's a great actor. The role's great for him. I get why they featured him prominently here.
There was another moment in the film too that is also like directly from the comics and fan service to the max. And it's in the beginning of the film when they're in the danger room and Colossus throws him.
Yes.
Because in the comics they call that the fastball special. So it's just another fun moment where I was like, they did the thing.
That was kind of cool. I didn't hate that part. I'm glad you mentioned all the kids, right? Because they had aged out of high school age by 2006. I don't know if they were still supposed to be in high school by the time this film was released, but they didn't look like it.
No, they it only took a few years, but they looked older and everyone else also looked way more jaded.
Yeah. Did we need Magneto as the villain again?
He's a pretty solid villain, you know?
He is, but 3 films in a row he's sort of the villain in the second one, but
yeah.
Magneto is an incredible villain because of how much he changes over the course of the comics. But even by the third film, he was basically the same motivation. It's Magneto doing Magneto things. And they couldn't even move away from it. They still use Magneto as the main villain in the prequel films.
Right. I mentioned how I knew Angel was a major character. Well, they featured him on the promotional material, right? There was even a poster of him wearing an X-Men uniform. He's basically in 2 scenes. Complete waste.
Complete waste, but you could also see in the behind the scenes, there are scenes where the wings that they used for Angel were prosthetic or like actual like practical effects versus the CGI wings.
Yeah, they didn't look bad.
Yeah,
I
they
don't
didn't look
think.
bad.
No.
Really thought there was going to be more with him in there.
We all did. I mean, I do remember seeing him on a poster, I think, in the movie theater. I'm like, well, he's obviously going to be a big part of this film. Nope.
Not really.
No. Kelsey Grammer's awesome. It's an inspired casting choice. I love him in this movie.
And he makes a return.
Oh, they bring him back?
They bring him back to play Beast in a end credit scene for the not very good Marvels film.
Yes. Yeah.
Huh. I missed that one.
He's also in a part in Deadpool, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong.
I don't know if it was still Kelsey Grammer, but there was a non-speaking role for Beast in the Deadpool film.
He's one of the best things about this film. I'll say that.
He was my favorite thing about it. He was my favorite
There are not
thing.
many highlights. Did anyone spot Dr. Chilton from Silence of the Lambs?
Oh, yes.
He's the guy interrogating Mystique early in the film. It's good casting. And then Moira McTaggart, Anton. Was that Scottish Elizabeth Hurley?
Why, yes, it was.
Final reason why it wasn't better, a rushed production. We've been hinting at this, right, about Fox just not ever wanting to change the release date. It worked against the film. They could have just delayed this for 6 months and tried to find the right director, but they went full steam ahead with the locked-in release date. The original climax of the film, that entire action sequence, that was supposed to take place in Washington, D.C., but Ratner insisted on moving it to Alcatraz and the Golden Gate Bridge. So John Bruno, who was one of the effects supervisors in this film, he estimated that the entire sequence cost $35 million to film. That was about 15% of the total budget.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I mentioned this earlier, but this film cost about twice as much as the second film. And the first film was made on a relatively modest budget of $70 million. So this is 3 times that budget. It doesn't look 3 times as good.
Well, there's a reason you don't see a full Sentinel. You only see its head.
Right.
Also
Well, I assume a lot of the budget went to the actors' salaries. I'm sure they all got raises by the time this film came out.
That's why Halle Berry came back as Storm, obviously, you know.
Right. Yeah, because James Marsden took a pay cut. Some of that CGI, I think a lot of it does hold up. You're right, Ben. But that de-aging.
Yeah, it's just the best.
I'll say this. It was groundbreaking because it was the very first movie to use de-aging, digital de-aging. But Patrick Stewart, his skin looks really smooth, like it's from a video game cutscene.
Mm-hmm.
Ian McKellen's mouth wasn't moving quite right. It's ambitious on their part.
It doesn't look perfect, but what's funny is there really wasn't a improvement when you look at the de-aging in Dial of Destiny.
We missed all that, Anton.
Yeah.
Whoa. Okay. I was saying there really isn't much of an improvement when you look at the same de-aging in Dial of Destiny.
No, you're kind of right. It's interesting because if you think about it, so the prologue of this film, they could have just filmed it with the 2 actors, and I don't think it would have mattered. Like if they had just said 20 years ago and just dyed McKellen's hair. I mean, Patrick Stewart, Charles was walking. It was obviously in the past.
Put a wig on Xavier.
Yeah, you didn't need to have all the de-aging.
Yeah.
Talk about a waste of money. And you'll like this. So here's a red flag for you. If you include Bryan Singer and Matthew Vaughn, a total of 8 directors passed on this before Ratner was hired. It's awful.
Wow.
That is very telling.
Did either of you read the interview that Ratner gave to MovieWeb to promote the film?
Oh my gosh, I didn't think it was real when I saw it.
It's real. Ben, this is absolutely worth a read. He begins the interview by saying that he gets a lot of his on-set energy from, quote, a lot of cocaine.
Stop.
I'm not sure if he was
said-
being sarcastic or not. I don't know.
Guess he really believes it's a hell of a drug.
That's how the interview starts.
Wow.
Yeah. This really was The Last Stand. Oh, man. What was Fox thinking here? They trapped themselves. There was like basically nowhere for them to go but backward.
Well, I'll say this. I mean, even though it wasn't it was a pretty rushed production to get everything put together. At least they didn't make this film like way too long by like trying to fit in over a long runtime. I would have rather gotten a short film that wasn't quite as good than like a long snore fest.
That's fair. I only had to sit through this for 90 minutes.
And in that sense, I thought the pacing actually was pretty good.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, if this had been like, oh man, imagine if this was like 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Oh no, it'll be off in an hour and 45 minutes. The runtime that it says on IMDb.
I'll tell you that. You know, Anton, you're absolutely right. If this film had been that long, I would be giving it an F.
But they kind of go beat for beat, like really quickly. You're in the first arc, you're in the second part, and boom, you're in the third part with a big battle. It's very clear, the storyline.
Yeah, you're right. There isn't much to it, and there should have been more to it because of what they were trying to do. So this movie made $235 million domestically, $225 internationally, $460 total, right? Even though it outgrossed the first two, it did not make nearly as much as Fox was hoping for. And I want to call this out because I found a number of articles online that highlight how financially successful this movie was. Anton, we talk about box office a lot on this podcast. It just leads me to believe a lot of people don't understand how the box office revenue works. So Fox would have had to split that with the theaters roughly in half, right? So that we're at 230. So if you take the budget of 210 and an unknown marketing budget into consideration, I doubt this movie made any profit at all. I hate saying it, but it probably would have been better if Bryan Singer had just directed it.
I also hate to agree with you, but it probably would have. I mean, we did get Days of Future Past, which I much prefer to this film.
I think, yes, it is a much better film. I found it confusing. Anything with time travel usually confuses me, but it's miles above this. This movie was doomed from the start. Like, Fox was trusting a director hired at the 11th hour who had no knowledge of the source material to direct the most expensive movie ever made, and they had no option of delaying anything. Like, that is just a recipe for disappointment.
Yeah.
Ratner would later get quite heated about the narrative that he somehow destroyed the franchise. He insisted that he actually kept the franchise alive. He said this in an MTV interview, which is pretty funny because they basically rebooted it. They canceled that Magneto movie, but they ended up using elements from the script in X-Men First Class. Yeah. And of course, 3 years after this, we did get X-Men Origins Wolverine. And as we start to wrap this up, I want to read you both a quote from Michael Curley of Pop Matters. He said, quote, "Ultimately, the first X-Men trilogy ended on a creative low note. The X-Men films and Fox comic book films were going through a rough patch in 2006. Despite that, X-Men The Last Stand remains the highest grossing X-Men film in North America, adjusted for inflation to date. It was a pretty substantial hit, but it weakened the franchise and the genre. Many of the filmmakers have subsequently distanced themselves from it or apologized for it, but its impact was felt in Hollywood. Studios still meddled to protect their enormous investments and valued release dates and mainstream appeal over satisfying creative decisions. In a way, the success of comic book films had caused this, and it would still be several years until they would escape this trend." End quote. I think Anton's speaking, but we can't hear him.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Good.
I mean,
Verizon.
Ben, Pat, do you feel like we're back in this same stage with Marvel films today?
Absolutely. The Marvel films right now are just, they're not, I hate to sound like I'm one of those people. Back in my day, Marvel movies were good. And I feel like this is the same exact thing that happened with the X-Men movies at that time.
I agree too. The Marvel films now are not interesting to me at all. I haven't seen one in quite some time. Yeah. But I do agree with this quote from this guy, right, Michael Curley, where everything that he said is true. Like, they valued the release date over actually getting the creative storytelling decisions correct. And this film shows for it.
I mean, if they actually did value the quality of the movie, do you believe that they could have made even more money? I mean, it was already a success, right? How much more money could they have made?
But
I think they could have made a lot more. It wasn't a success, though, based on what we know.
But it was the pressure. It was the pressure of let's stick to the release date and put out whatever we put out.
That's just bad project management right there.
Definitely.
But how often do we now see studios still just doing this? Only recently, even in the MCU, did Kevin Feige say we're going to push back release dates.
I think they had no choice. They had a choice here, and they just didn't want to do it.
Well, it's the season finale, and man, the film that we ended on, it is in one very telling because it almost is a reflection of the Marvel, the MCU today. but also very timely because X-Men 97 is streaming on Disney Plus right now, and
Yes,
that
it
is a
is.
hot series.
Yeah.
I don't even know what that is.
Oh man.
Oh, Pat, it actually is pretty incredible. Were you a fan of the original X-Men 90 series?
Not really.
Yeah, even if you weren't.
Sorry, like I can't. I'm not gonna lie to you on the podcast. Like I saw it a little bit, but not really.
Yeah, no, I mean, really, even if you weren't, it's a fun series because it's very well written.
Maybe I'll check it out one day in the summer.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, anything we want to add before we bring this home and give our verdicts? All
All's
right.
been said.
Well, Ben, as our guest today, would you like to go first?
Of course. That's great. All right. So as we talked about, lack of direction, too many characters, and killing off Cyclops at the beginning, like all of that stuff, just really kind of like made me want to give this a bad review. But like, just like life, even if something is a lemon, it could be squeezed. The visual effects at that time were ahead of its time. It still boosted the careers of other actors and actresses, and it inspired future films like we just talked about, X-Men Origins, Wolverine. So I'm gonna give it a solid C.
Wow, that is very generous.
Very generous.
Yeah.
Anton, I'll go next then.
Okay.
I really enjoyed the first two films, especially the second one. This is a horrible film. It is miles below the quality of the first two. This had a lot of things working against it that we talked about. It was a very rushed production. They tried to cram two major storylines into one bizarrely short 90-minute film. As brisk as the pacing was, I was pretty bored by the runtime, despite it, not even being a long movie. I found myself wondering when this film was going to be over because I just wasn't enjoying much of it. I don't think any of the acting was particularly good. Even, great actors like Ian McKellen and Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart really seemed to be phoning it in. It's like they couldn't wait to just punch the clock and get out of there. And there were way too many characters. There was a lot of random characters. Nobody really had an arc. Someone like Jean Grey, Phoenix, she should have had the biggest arc, but they don't really explain her arc very well. Some of the set pieces are well done. There's some good visual effects. There's also some very dated visual effects. I don't remember anything about the score, which leads me to believe it wasn't very memorable. There is some fun moments in the film. There's some fun jokes, but it really is kind of a mess. I will say that I have seen far worse, but overall, I just found this film to be horrible. There's no chance of me ever rewatching it. I completely understand why they wrote it out of existence. There's just nothing in here that I can really ever recommend to someone seeing. If someone was going to watch the X-Men films, I would just tell them to skip this. This is D-. Had it been longer, I think I would have gone F. But hey, at least it was only 90 minutes long. So D- for me.
Nice. So I really appreciated the fact that this film wasn't that long. For me, the pacing fit very comfortably because it did not slow down. You knew exactly where the film was going. And as a fan of the comics, I have to admit that there was some guilty pleasure seeing all of the different comic references come to fruition in the film. Having said that, it is not a good film, and it is one of the least, if not like my least favorite in the series. Actually, it's not my least favorite, but it is really bottom of the barrel among all of the X-Men films. I think that the highlights, of course, are very strong characterizations from like Kelsey Grammer as Beast. I thought that was awesome, but there's really just more bad than there is good in this film. Even the action, which at times was pretty cool, it still ends up being just a cheap throwaway compared to the lack of proper storytelling in the film. I think we all feel the same way. It's not a great X-Men film, but we at least had it until the next one, until the next good one. So for me, this was a solid D.
All right. So Ben, with really lofty praise.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's maybe because like I've seen really really terrible movies, like the 1998 TV movie Nick Fury, Agent of Shield. All right, that right there. If you ever get a chance, it's probably on YouTube. Watch it. It's terrible. So that's why I was like, all right, from Marvel, it's not the worst.
Never even heard of it.
Oh, it's terrible. It's David Hasselhoff.
Yep, as Nick Fury.
Wow.
It is terrible.
Oh,
Yeah,
Is it on Disney Plus? Are they proud of that?
it is
No.
nowhere. Right?
That
like
or the
Too bad to
YouTube
erase it.
It's like one of those weird Tubi movies or straight to DVD.
or there's a Fantastic Four film that was never released.
Yes.
Really?
Yep, they made a full
Huh.
Fantastic Four film. I think it was in like the 80s. They never released it, but they had all the promo, they had the film shot, and they just never released it.
I
Yeah.
was gonna say the ones they did release weren't very good either.
I'm surprised
And there's gonna be another Fantastic
they
Four film
just didn't
released
make the one with Jem
pretty soon.
John Christ. Yeah.
Oh, they're making another one? They're trying again?
Yep, except this time it's in
That's-
the MCU.
It's nice. Of course it is.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for X-Men The Last Stand. Ben, thank you so much for joining
Oh,
us.
thank you all
Yes.
for having me.
Ben, it was such a pleasure having you.
It was my pleasure being here.
Well, we are going to have you back next season, I believe. I don't think we've talked about what, but we will discuss further. Well, you already talked yourself onto the Da Vinci Code.
Oh yeah, I'm all for that.
Yeah, that's going to be fun. I haven't seen that in, it's been a while. But yeah, that's it, Anton. That's season 4 wrapped up. That's it.
How have we already done 4 seasons?
Because we are a machine.
Yeah, we are just going, and having fun doing it.
A ton of fun. We're, of course, going to be doing our season recap. That is a shorter episode. We will make that available in the coming days after you hear this one. And then season 5 will be kicking off immediately. No breaks for us. We're trying to see how far we can go without taking any kind of a hiatus. So if you like what you hear on Why Wasn't It Better, there's a lot more to come. And we will see you next time. Take care, everyone. Thanks for listening to Why Wasn't It Better? If you've made it this far, it's safe to assume that you like what you hear. If you have not already done so, please hit that subscribe button and become a follower wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. If you really like what you hear, you can contribute to our podcast monetarily and sign up for our Patreon. So whether you're commuting, chilling at home, or embarking on a nostalgia-fueled movie adventure, make Why Wasn't It Better your go-to podcast companion.